and he was the one who had sent me that first encrypted text. Stay tuned, babies. This grandma is about to find out that family secrets go a lot deeper than a basement floor. Y'all better grab some tissues and a stiff drink, sugar, because my heart was doing a tap dance on my ribs. I was sitting in the most powerful boardroom in Zurich, surrounded by men who could start wars with a phone call, but all I could see was that grainy security feed from my little cottage back home. That man standing on my porch, it wasn't just a resemblance, it was the same walk, the same way he tilted his head. And that pocket watch, that was Henry's heartbeat, the only clock he ever made that didn't just tell time, it kept it. I didn't say a word to the board. I just grabbed my designer bag, tucked that SD card into my brassiere, and walked out of that room like I owned the building, which technically I did now. Keep the seat warm, boys, I hollered over my shoulder. Mama's got an appointment with a ghost. 12 hours later, I was stepping out of a black town car in front of my own gate. The air was cool, smelling of the lavender I'd planted and the damp earth of a coming storm. The man was still there, sitting on my porch swing, slowly winding that pocket watch. Tick, tick, tick. "It's about time you came home, Ellie," he said, his voice as raspy as sandpaper on silk. I stopped at the bottom of the steps, my knees feeling like they were made of jelly. "Henry, is that really you? Or has Frank's betrayal finally made me lose my marbles?" He stood up and the porch light caught his face. He was older, covered in scars I didn't recognize, but those eyes, they were the same eyes that used to look at me while he taught me how to fix a cuckoo clock. "I never left you, honey. I was just the shadow, keeping the wolves at bay." Frank was a wolf I didn't see coming. I ran up those steps and hugged him so hard I thought I'd break a rib. He smelled like cedarwood and old paper, the smell of my childhood. We sat on that swing, and for the next 3 hours, he told me the truth. He hadn't just faked his death to protect the money, he'd done it because the tree wanted to use his genius to build a global surveillance system. He'd spent 40 years living in the second house, the one I'd found in the valley, acting as a double agent. "But Henry," I asked, wiping my eyes, "if you were watching, why did you let Frank treat me like that? Why let him fly off to the beach with that blonde trampoline?" Henry gave me a sad smile. "Because you had to wake up, Eleanor. If I'd stepped in, you'd still be the quiet wife hiding in the kitchen. I needed you to find your own teeth. And boy, did you bite." But then his face went stone cold. "The game isn't over, sugar. Beatrice didn't just want the journal. She wanted the Genesis key. It's the only thing that can shut down Matree's main server in Geneva permanently. And Frank, that snake didn't just cheat on you. He stole the key from my second house a month ago." My blood turned to ice. "Frank has the key? But he's in a cell. He's wearing an orange jumpsuit." "Check your messages, Ellie," Henry said quietly. I pulled out my phone. A news alert popped up. High-level prison break. Former CEO Frank Peterson escapes during transport. The tree had extracted him. They didn't care about his fraud or his mistresses. They needed that key, and they were using Frank to get it. Frank wasn't a prisoner anymore. He was their last-ditch weapon. "He's heading for the third house," Henry said, standing up. "The one on the cliffs. It's the original transmission site. If he plugs that key in, every secret you have on that SD card will be wiped, and the Sunset Project will go live. They'll erase anyone who knows the truth, starting with us." "Well," I said, standing up and tightening my coat, "I guess Frank's about to find out that a forgotten ticket is the least of his worries. I'm going to show him what 47 years of suppressed rage looks like." We didn't take the car. Henry led me to the back of the garden, to a hidden cellar door I'd always thought was for storm protection. Inside was a high-speed underground rail line that Frank had never known about. "Where does this go?" I asked, looking at the sleek, silver pod waiting for us. "To the end of the line, sugar," Henry said, handing me a heavy, silver-plated pistol. "You ready to finish this?" "Henry," I said, checking the safety just like he taught me when I was 10. I was born ready. Frank wanted a young woman and a beach. I'm gonna give him a cliff and a very hard landing. As we hurtled through the dark tunnel at 200 miles an hour, I looked at the SD card in my hand. It was the weight of the world. But I wasn't just Eleanor the wife anymore. I was Eleanor the clockmaker's daughter, and it was time to break the machine. But just then the rail car lurched violently. A screen in front of us flickered to life. It was Frank. He was standing on a windy cliff, holding a glowing blue device. He looked wild, his eyes full of madness. "I see you, Ellie," he screamed over the wind. "I see you and your ghost of a father. You thought you could take everything from me? I built this empire with my blood. If I can't have it, nobody can. I'm turning the Sunset Project on, and I'm setting the target to your cottage. Everyone you love is about to be disposed of." "Frank, don't!" I yelled, but the screen went black. The rail car started to smoke. We were being sabotaged from the inside. Stay tuned, babies. The clock is ticking, and Grandma's about to make some real noise. Hold on to your hearts, sugar, 'cause the air is getting thin, and the stakes are higher than Frank's ego. The rail car was screeching like a banshee as it ground to a halt in the middle of a dark underground tunnel. Smoke was pouring from the console, and for a second I thought the tree had finally buried us for good. But Henry, that old fox, didn't even blink. He kicked the emergency hatch open and pulled me out into the damp, cold air. "We're under the cliffs, Ellie," he whispered. "The third house is right above us. We have 10 minutes before Frank uploads that Genesis key and turns your life's work into a pile of ash." We climbed a spiral staircase that felt like it was going straight to heaven, or hell, depending on who was waiting at the top. My lungs were burning, and my shoulder was still throbbing from that bullet graze on the yacht. But every time I felt like quitting, I pictured Frank's smug face at the airport. I pictured him telling me he forgot my ticket while he was planning to erase my very existence. That was all the fuel I needed. We burst through a trapdoor into the third house. It wasn't a house at all. It was a glass-walled command center, perched on the edge of a jagged cliff, overlooking the roaring Atlantic. The wind was howling outside, shaking the very foundation of the building. And there, standing in the center of a circle of glowing monitors, was Frank. He looked like he'd crawled through a sewer to get there. His orange jumpsuit was torn, his face was bruised, but his eyes, they were glowing with a feverish light. In his hand, he clutched the Genesis key, a small, pulsating blue crystal that looked like it held the power of 1,000 suns. "You're late, Ellie Bell," he shrieked over the roar of the wind. "The upload is at 90%. In 60 seconds, every digital footprint of the Peterson name and the Vance legacy will be rewritten. I'll be a hero, and you'll just be a crazy old woman who died in a tragic kitchen fire." "Drop the key, Frank," Henry shouted, stepping forward with his silver pistol raised. "It's over. The board is done with you. Beatrice is in a cell. You're holding a dead man's hand." Frank laughed, a jagged, broken sound. "Beatrice was weak. She wanted to lead the tree. I just want to burn it all down and start over. With this key, I can rewrite the bank accounts. I can buy a new face, a new life, and a dozen young women to fill the void you left, Eleanor." Honey, that was the last straw. I lunged at Frank with the speed of a woman who's spent 40 years repressed and angry. We hit the floor, tumbling toward the glass wall that looked out over the 300-foot drop to the ocean. "You think you're a big man, Frank?" I hissed, my fingers clawing at his face. "You're just a small, lonely thief who got lucky 40 years ago. You didn't build an empire. You stole a clockmaker's dream." Frank shoved me back with a strength born of pure desperation. He scrambled toward the main console, the Genesis key glowing brighter as it neared the port. 95%, the computer voice droned. Henry fired, but Silver Fox, who had somehow survived the yacht and was hiding in the shadows, leaped out and tackled him. The two men went crashing into a wall of server racks, sparks flying everywhere. I was alone with Frank. He reached the console, his hand trembling as he prepared to insert the key. "Goodbye, Ellie. I'd say I'll miss you, but I've already forgotten you ever existed." But Frank forgot one very important thing. He forgot that I was the one who maintained the timepiece. I was the one who knew how the gears worked. I didn't try to pull him away from the console. Instead, I grabbed a heavy iron paperweight shaped like a clock, Henry's first design, and hurled it at the glass wall behind Frank. The reinforced glass shattered into a million diamonds. The pressure difference was massive. The wind screamed into the room, a literal hurricane of salt and fury. Frank was caught off balance, the wind whipping his torn jumpsuit like a sail. He slipped on the broken glass, his feet skidding toward the edge of the cliff. "Help me," he screamed, his hands wildly grasping at the air. I stood there, my hair blowing in the gale, my feet planted firm. I looked at the man I had loved, the man who had tried to dispose of me like yesterday's trash. He was dangling over the edge, one hand clutching a metal railing, the other still tightly gripping the Genesis key. "The key, Frank," I said, my voice echoing over the storm. "Give me the key, and I'll pull you up." "You'll save me?" he gasped, his eyes wide with hope. "You'll take me back?" "I'll save the world from you, Frank," I said. He reached out the hand with the key. I grabbed it, feeling the cold vibration of the crystal. But as I pulled the key from his grasp, the computer voice announced, "Upload complete." Frank's face lit up with a final hideous triumph. "Too late. The cottage is targeted. Your life is gone." But I just smiled. "Actually, Frank, I swapped the targeting coordinates when I was in the basement. The disposal isn't headed for my cottage. It's headed for these coordinates. Right now." The sound of an incoming missile, a high-tech, silent kinetic strike, began to whistle in the air above us. Frank's face went from triumph to pure unadulterated terror. He looked at the empty space beneath his feet, then at me. "Eleanor, please." "I'm sorry, Frank," I said, letting go of the railing. "But I only have one ticket left. And it's not for you." Frank fell. He didn't scream. He just disappeared into the dark, churning waves of the Atlantic, still looking for a beach he would never reach. I turned back to the room. Henry had knocked Silver Fox unconscious and was frantically typing at the console. "Ellie, the strike is 10 seconds out. We have to go." The cliffside shook, and the entire command center collapsed into the sea, taking the tree's last transmission site with it. We emerged from the tunnel a mile away, onto a quiet beach. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The real beach, the one I'd earned. Henry sat down on the sand, looking older than ever but finally at peace. "It's done, Ellie. The Genesis key is in your hand. The tree is dead. You're free." I looked at the blue crystal in my palm. It was over. Frank was gone. Beatrice was gone. My life was my own again. But as I looked at the horizon, I saw a single small boat approaching the shore. A boat with a white flag. "Who is that?" I asked, my hand instinctively going to the pistol in my pocket. The boat hit the sand, and a young woman stepped out. She looked exactly like Tiffany, but her eyes were different. They were full of tears. "Mrs. Peterson?" she asked, her voice trembling. "My name is Sarah. I'm Tiffany's sister, and I have something of yours, something Frank stole 30 years ago." She held out a small, lace-covered bundle. "Stay tuned, sweethearts, because the biggest secret of all wasn't in a basement or a vault. It was breathing." "Well, sugar, here we are at the end of the road, and let me tell you, the view is a lot different than I expected." I was standing on that quiet beach, the smell of salt and burnt circuitry still clinging to my hair, watching this girl Sarah walk toward me. She looked like a ghost of the woman who had tried to ruin my life, but her hands were shaking, and she was clutching that lace-covered bundle like it was the last spark of light in a dark world. "What is that, honey?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I felt Henry stiffen beside me. He knew. He'd known all along. Sarah reached me and slowly pulled back the lace. It wasn't a baby, like I'd feared for a split second. It was an old silver locket, the one I'd worn the day I gave birth to Chloe. The one Frank told me had been lost in the hospital laundry. But inside the locket wasn't just a picture. It was a microchip and a lock of hair. "Frank didn't just want the Vance money, Mrs. Peterson," Sarah said, the tears streaming down her face. "He was obsessed with purity. He didn't think Chloe was enough of a Vance. 30 years ago, he took the medical records of your firstborn, the twin brother the doctors told you didn't survive. Frank traded him. He sold his own son to the tree to secure his place at the table." The world stopped spinning. The air left my lungs. 47 years. I had lived 47 years with a man who hadn't just cheated on me, hadn't just tried to dispose of me, but had sold our flesh and blood for a seat in a boardroom. "Where is he?" I roared, the sound coming from the very bottom of my soul. "Where is my son?" Sarah pointed to the SD card in my hand. "The file is under Project Heritage. Frank kept tabs on him his whole life, watching him from the shadows, waiting for the day he could bring him back as a perfect heir. But your son, he's not like Frank. He's the one who's been sending you the encrypted texts. He's the one who's been helping you from the inside." I looked at the card, then at the horizon. The silver fox, the man who had been chasing me, the man who had looked so familiar in that dark basement, he wasn't a corporate shark. He was my boy. He'd been working for the tree, yes, but he'd been sabotaging them every step of the way to protect the mother he was told had abandoned him. I turned to Henry. You knew my boy was alive." "I knew someone was helping us, Ellie," Henry said, his eyes soft with regret. "But I didn't know the cost until now. Frank told me the boy died to keep me under his thumb. He played us both." I didn't wait. I used the satellite phone Henry had and dialed the number associated with the Silver Fox's private line. It rang once. "Mom?" the voice on the other end said. It was smooth, calm, and for the first time I heard the tremor of a child looking for home. "I'm here, baby," I sobbed. "I'm at the beach, and I've got your ticket, a real one, for both of us." 2 hours later a helicopter landed on the sand. Silver Fox, no, my son James stepped out. He didn't have a gun. He didn't have a suit. He was just a man in a plain t-shirt, looking at me with eyes that matched my own. We didn't need words. We just held each other while the sun finally cleared the horizon, burning away the last of the tree's shadows. We spent the next month dismantling the empire. With the Genesis key and the heritage files, James and I wiped every crooked account, closed every disposal site, and turned the Vance fortune into a global foundation for families destroyed by corporate greed. Beatrice stayed in prison, and as for Frank, the ocean kept its secrets, and the world was better for it. I went back to my cottage one last time. Chloe was there, waiting for me. We sat on the porch, James, Chloe, Henry, and me. I looked at my daughter, who had finally learned that money isn't a shield, it's a weight. I looked at my son, who had finally found the mother he thought was a myth. I pulled out my old knitting bag and took out a final piece of paper. It was the original beach ticket Frank had given me at the airport. I lit a match and watched it curl into ash in the breeze. "You know, sweethearts," I said, leaning back in my rocking chair, "Frank thought he was so clever. He thought he could leave me behind at the gate while he flew off to a new life. But he forgot that the person who packs the bags is the one who knows what's really inside them." James laughed, putting an arm around my shoulder. "So what's the plan now, boss? We've got the foundation, we've got the legacy, and we've got enough money to buy an island." I smiled, looking at the lavender in my garden, blooming brighter than ever. "Actually, honey," I said, "I think I'm done with islands. I think I'm done with secrets. I've got my family, I've got my home, and for the first time in 47 years, I've got the only ticket that matters." "Which one is that?" Chloe asked. "The one that leads to a peaceful night's sleep," I replied. I looked at the camera, at you, my sweethearts, and that's the true story of Grandma Eleanor. Frank wanted a beach, but he got the abyss. I stayed at the airport, and I ended up owning the sky. Don't ever let anyone tell you you're just an old woman. Because a woman with a memory and a grudge, that's the most dangerous clock in the world. And honey, my time is finally mine. I winked, took a long sip of my sweet tea, and watched the sunset. The sunset project was over, but Grandma's day, it was just beginning.